Okay. Ah, okay. Got it. Um, okay. Hi, everybody. Lori Satushek here. Thank you so much for coming and visiting our webinar today. And I'm really excited about today because um, some of you know this, that Marcy from the Garden Spot has sold her nursery, but she sold it to Paige. And so today is kind of an introduction for you guys to kind of get to know Paige, who's the new owner of the Garden Spot, and then for Paige to also give you share information about gardening, starting your garden. So she's going to have some great tips for you today. But first, I just want to tell you a little bit of the Garden Spot. For those of you that don't know, Marcy opened the first Garden Spot in 1985, and that was in Wallingford in Seattle. Excuse me. In 1990 is when she opened the Garden Spot in Bellingham. And Paige, you started working for her 22 years later, right? 2012,
Yep,
right? Yeah,
2012.
2012. So at that time, Paige, maybe why don't you talk a little bit about, 2012. So this is 10 years later.
Mhm.
And at that time, you didn't really know too much about gardening. You're just a worker. Why don't we just take it from there? Maybe tell us a
Sure.
little bit about working at Garden Spot, and then your interest in plants, and then how it's evolved
Mhm.
into becoming the plant expert and now the plant owner of the Garden Spot. How
Sure.
about that?
Thank you, Lori. Yeah, I'd love
Sure.
to. So yeah, let me open this here.
Mm-mm.
And I'll go to my story.
Oh, great.
That's me. So yeah, thank you, Lori. I started in 2012 at Garden Spot, and I was 19, I think 19 or 20 at the time, and just knew nothing at all about gardening or plants. I knew I liked plants, but that's about it. I started as a cashier, and I worked in the store for about 3 years. Then I went outside and I was loading soils for a couple years. I did the plant receiving for a few years. Then I started working the sales floor, learning more, every day, which is, why I love this industry and why I love gardening. So you can learn something new every single day. And Marcy and I started talking about, the transition a few years before we made it happen. And in January 2021, I took over for Marcy, and she was able to retire. And yeah, we've just been rolling since, and I've just been loving it. And we've kept everything mostly the same, kept the same feel of the Garden Spot, the Garden Spot that we all love. But yeah, made a few new changes, a few new products, and yeah, it's just very exciting every day. Just seeing where we can go. So that's kind of my story. And now, I mean, I love gardening. I love pollinator plants, growing food. Those are kind of my passions in my yard. And
Okay.
so yeah. So today I was just hoping to talk a little bit about some basics of gardening, and if you're thinking about starting a garden or starting a new section in your garden, just some of the things to consider and yeah, think about as you're planning your garden.
At Paige, but
Mhm.
just before you go into that too, I just
Sure.
wanted to talk about too, your other expert area of expertise is you are a licensed veterinarian technician. Is that
Mhm.
right?
That's right.
For a
Yeah.
while, and you did
Hmm.
wildlife rehab and
Hmm.
sanctuary medicine and ER medicine for animals. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah. I
So
worked
you're
at. Mhm.
you're an animal and plant lover.
Definitely, yeah. And some of you might have seen our "We Love Dogs" sign out front. So we've become
Yes.
very, very animal friendly. Yeah, I love animals. I'm actually still licensed, so
Yeah. That's
yeah,
great.
yeah. 'Cause,
Yeah.
I love the wildlife rehab. I did emergency medicine for a couple of years, but gardening always brought me back, and this is definitely my true love being here.
It's so exciting. I was telling Paige, you guys, before this started, that I am going to be talking to her more because I'm on the board for the Wacom Horticulture Society. And almost all of us on the board are in our 60s or 70s, and some older. So we need some fresh new ideas. And so I am going to be hoping that Paige can help with that and get, bring her and her friends and somebody to the Wacom Horticulture Society so we get fresh ideas there. And anyways, so that's another story. But why don't you go ahead and talk about your topics now, Paige, if you don't
Sure.
mind.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so I'll just dive in here.
Okay.
So I just want to talk about, the things to consider when you're planning your garden or planning a new section in your yard. And I guess the first thing to think about is what kind of conditions do you have in your yard? You may have a really sunny spot, a really shady spot, some part sun. And it's also, important to look at how much space you're really working with. Take some measurements. Are you planting in the ground, or are you going to be doing more things in planters? Because those things are going to definitely narrow down your choices in plants. So take a little bit and just take a look around your yard, watch where the sun is throughout the day, see where the spots where your plants are going to be baking in the sun or where they get breaks throughout the day. So the first step is observation. Check out your yard. See if you have environmental extreme factors like serious wind. A nor'easter wind can definitely affect your plant choices. And even being close to the ocean can affect what kind of plants will grow well. What kind of soil do you have? Are you working with really clay, hard, packed soil? Do you have kind of sandy soil? All of these things can affect what you can and what you can plant, what you'll have success with. And another big factor to think about is wildlife. Wildlife is going to be a huge part of your garden. Do you get bunnies coming through your yard, mowing things down? Do you get a herd of deer coming through your yard? Because that will definitely affect what you can have in your yard, and yeah, your plant selection. So I'll talk a little bit about deer in the garden because that's a huge topic around this area. Lots of us are constantly fighting the deer or working with them, cohabitating with them. They're so cute. They're so fun to watch, but they can be very, very destructive in the garden. And it seems like every year their tastes are just expanding, and the babies will just try every single kind of plant. So it can be really tricky. And the first line of defense could be a fence. They say at least 6 feet high because deer do jump. And even a 6 foot fence doesn't always deter them, but fencing can be a good first step. And even fencing around some new plantings can help. Maybe you have a fresh new tree and you want to protect that bark from those young bucks from rubbing up against the tree. So think about things like that. And another thing you can do that's really effective is the deer spray. And there's all sorts of sprays now. It's not just the really bad smelly stuff. There's a lot of products now that have kind of rosemary based oil based. So they smell good to us, but they smell terrible to the deer. So things like that, you can spray directly onto your prized plants, or you can even soak a rag in the spray and hang them around. I've heard a lot of people have some good success with that. Something else I just heard yesterday actually was a motion sensor sprinkler. So you can, get really creative. There's all sorts of things that you can do to deter them. Things with movement. You can have different garden art that makes movement or sound. Sometimes that can help. But of course, the first things first is your plant selection, picking things that aren't their absolute favorites. And of course, it's not a sure bet because you've got the babies trying just everything. But there are some good, pretty good deer bets out there. So I wanted to talk about a few good things that you can generally have good success with. So I've got a few shrubs here and a few perennials that work well. Some good shrubs to work with are osmanthus. That's a really nice evergreen, blooming, fragrant shrub. Can get pretty big, good hedging plant. The deer usually leave that one alone. Ceanothus is another really good hedging plant that blooms like crazy, beautiful blue flowers, great for pollinators, but it's really oily, so they don't like it as much. And that's a good that's a good bet too. If you're looking at plants, if it's really fragrant or really oily or pokey, that could be a pretty good bet against deer. And hibiscus,
Ceanothus, that's
hardy
a,
hibiscus. Oh, go ahead.
I'm sorry. Oh, the ceanothus, that's like California lilac, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
California lilac.
And the
Mm-hmm.
osmanthus, is that the one that smells like orange blossoms?
It's kind of similar, yeah. Because there's the choicea. That one smells kind of like orange blossoms, and that's a
Little
great
white
deer.
flowers.
Yeah, little
Okay.
white flowers, real similar. Because
Okay.
there's choicea, which is good in shade, and then osmanthus is kind of its similar counterpart for sun. But both very good deer beds, good evergreens. And yeah, hardy hibiscus is a really nice one that actually grows really well here. It can be a good deciduous hedging plant, beautiful bloomer, and they generally leave it alone. Ilex, which is the Japanese holly, those are pretty good bets, and it's a huge group, lots of variety. Some that produce berries, some that are good hedging plants, some that are a little bit smaller for small hedges. So that's a great group to work with. Sarcococa is another really good evergreen shade shrub, and that one smells really nice too. Usually blooms around January, February. But yeah, a great deer bet for shade. And then lilac trees, lilac shrubs. Those are great for deer. Again, super fragrant. It's funny. It's usually the nice fragrant things that smell good to us smell bad to them. So that's generally kind of a good rule of thumb there. And then lots of perennials that they'll generally leave alone. Poppies are great ones, and it's a beautiful category of flowers. Lots of different colors, lots of different types, and they're a little hairy. Generally, the kind of hairy, woolly things they'll leave alone as well. And then catmint. Catmint is one of my favorite groups of plants. The botanical is nepeta, so it's a little different than catnip. Usually, it's kind of a low-growing, kind of silvery perennial with beautiful blue flowers, very prolific bloomer, spring through summer. So that's a great one that they generally leave alone, and a lot of variety in that group as well. And then, of course, lavender. Lavender is a great one for a nice hot spot. They almost always leave that one alone. Very oily, very fragrant, but great for a hot, sunny spot. And Shasta daisies are another beautiful one that they generally leave alone. Big white daisies. There's also some double yellows. You can get a little bit of height out of some of those, so that's a nice one for sun, and a couple ones for shade. Brunnera. Brunnera is a beautiful foliage plant, kind of a silvery leaf with blue flowers. Stays pretty low. That's a great little shade plant that they generally leave alone. It's a little bit hairy again. And then bleeding hearts. Bleeding hearts are a great little native plant. A lot of variety in that one as well. There's white ones, red ones, pink ones, golden foliage, green foliage. So that's a great category to work with too. And they generally leave it alone. So yeah, that's a little bit
And
about. Oh, go ahead.
I'm just going to say too, to people that have questions about these plants, there's some questions in the comments that Paige will answer questions at the end, right, Paige?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
anyone that has any questions about anything, you can write them in the comments, and so we make sure that we get them. Hannah will help with that, but there'll be time at the end for any kind of questions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead, Paige.
All right. So then, so when you're thinking about your garden, we've kind of talked about conditions that you're working with. But I think a really important thing to consider is, what do you want from your garden? Do you want a peaceful place for yourself to relax? Are you going to be entertaining people? Are you making your garden for the wildlife and the pollinators? Are you hoping to sit back and watch some hummingbirds? Are you hoping to grow cutting flowers? Or are you growing food? So those are kind of some questions to ask yourself. What do you want? What do you want out of your yard? So let's say you want to grow some food. Super easy to grow food in this environment. We have a great environment for all sorts of things. So ask yourself a few more questions. What do you like to eat? What kind of veggies do you like? What kind of fruit do you like? Do you like blueberries? Do you like tomatoes? Because no matter what, no matter what kind of food you're choosing, it should be something that you like to eat, you like to snack on or preserve, not just, what's the easiest. And then, what kind of sun are you working with? Do you have full sun? Hot full sun can be great for tomatoes and peppers. Or do you have a little bit of shade? If you've got kind of a part sun situation, you might be looking at some more greens, or even blueberries will do fine in kind of a part sun situation. And then are you planting in the ground, or are you planting in pots? Because you can still grow a lot of food in pots if you just have a balcony or a patio, but it may kind of limit your choices in the size of plants that you can grow. So there are a few things that are much easier from seed to grow, and then everything else is super easy to grow from starts. So if you are starting from seed, we find that spinach is much easier from seed. It's less likely to bolt if you just plant directly into the ground from seed. And all of these things I would suggest to plant directly into the ground rather than starting inside in pots. But spinach, carrots, beets, radishes, any kind of root vegetable is going to do a lot better from seed in the ground rather than transplanting and disturbing those roots. Corn is another one that is really easy from seed, a little bit easier from seed than starts. But just about everything else is super easy from a start. Can often be easier to, plant a tomato from a start rather than starting it inside in March. But all sorts of starts for all sorts of skill levels. And so there's lots that you can plant right now. So a few things that you can plant now are some of the hardier herbs like thyme, sage, rosemary. I know a lot of people lost their rosemary over this last winter, but this is an ideal time to plant some more rosemary. And lettuce, spinach, kale, all sorts of greens can go in now. Things like Swiss chard, any of those little salad greens, mustard greens. It's a great time to get those going. And broccoli and cabbage. Those are great to start right now. They're kind of cooler crops, and we're having kind of a cool late spring right now. Carrots, radishes, beets. It's a great time to get those seeds in the ground. And then things that will come on a little bit later, you might want to wait to plant, are things like corn, cucumbers, squash, tomatoes, and basil. Those things you might want to wait until the end of April, beginning of May, because those things are going to need soil temperatures around 50 degrees or so. So still a little chilly for a lot of things, but there's a lot that we can do right now. So that's kind of the basics of starting a veggie garden, growing some food. But of course, if you are growing food, a really important thing is pollinator plants. Because a lot of your food crops, in order to produce yields, are going to need pollinators. So this can be really fun. You can mix in some different pollinator flowers in with your veggie beds. You can have a flower bed on the side, or maybe you just want to grow some pollinator plants because they're beautiful, and it's really fun to kick back in the garden and watch the butterflies and bees and hummingbirds. So if you are doing your garden for pollinators and wildlife, there are a few things to consider. One is to make sure that you have something blooming all year round, because once the pollinators know that your garden is a hot spot for blooms, they're going to keep visiting. They're going to check all year and see what's happening in your garden, especially hummingbirds. A lot of hummingbirds over winter here. And so even in the wintertime, they're looking for flowers. And if you had some beautiful things going all summer, they're going to be checking in the winter too. And the other big thing is water sources. Having water for those pollinators is super important. It might be as simple as a bird bath or maybe a little fountain. But running water especially is very appealing to those guys. And they need food, but they need water just as much. So super important to have some water sources available. And that's year round as well. And warming surfaces are also very important, but this is one you can have a lot of fun with. So warming surfaces could be something like, could be as simple as small flat stones. And this is super important for butterflies and bees. They like to rest and warm their wings. You can also do all sorts of garden art. You can really have fun with it. Just pick things that you think a little pollinator could land on and warm up on. And then, of course, the other thing is shelter. And shelter could be as simple as a few shrubs. Most little birds and pollinators want somewhere where they can rest and be safe from predators. So shelter is just as important as flowers. And I've got a little list of some pollinator plant ideas. And of course, the list is very, very long, but I just pulled up some of my favorites here. So if you're trying to attract bees to your yard, there's all sorts of things you can do. And a good rule of thumb for bees is they love blue flowers, and they love any kind of flat surface that has multiple pollinator sources, something like an echinacea, a daisy-like flower that has multiple little pollen sources. So cone flowers are great for them. Things like thistle, sea holly, those big round blue flowers, they love those. Lots of pollen in there. Catmint, again, I'll bring up catmint a lot here because it's one of my favorites. But that's a nice little low one with the little blue flowers most of the season. Caryopteris is a great blooming shrub. It's a nice deciduous shrub with blue flowers, very, very prolific in the summer. And Monarda, also known as bee balm, is a great one for all sorts of pollinators, but it has multiple little red flowers kind of in bunches. And that's a nice little tall flower, tall summer blooming. And then butterflies. Butterflies like all sorts of things, but some of their favorites are butterfly bushes, yarrow. Yarrow is a great, a native one too for the butterflies. Lavatera is a nice kind of taller, big flower, kind of like a hibiscus flower, so a little bit tropical looking. And hollyhock too. Hollyhocks are great because you get a little bit of height. Some of them get 6 to 8 feet tall. And then, of course, butterfly weed. Butterfly weed is a great one for the monarchs as they're passing through. But lots and lots of options for those guys, too. And then hummingbirds. This is often, people's favorite category. They're so fun to watch, and there's just so many things that they love from our gardens. So I've got some spring flowering plants here and some summer flowering plants. So Sarcocoa was one I mentioned earlier. It's a great early bloomer, kind of February, so super early spring, late winter. That's a great one for them. Agastache, also known as hyssop, is a really, really nice prolific perennial. Gets to be about 1.5 feet tall. Just pushes blooms most of the season, and they just love it. All sorts of colors, pinks, oranges, reds. And then you've got shrubs like Weigelia. Weigelia is a super prolific spring bloomer, and it just gets, covered in big kind of tube-shaped flowers. And tube-shaped flowers are a really good indicator that it's a great plant for hummingbirds. And flowering currants, that's one that's going off right now, another good native. And those are great. They have red tube-shaped flowers. It can be a nice tall shrub, deciduous shrub, maybe about 8 feet tall or so, but stays kind of narrow. So it's, not bad for a smaller space. And then honeysuckle is a great vine for them. And that's one that goes off pretty early. And then, of course, columbine. You guys have probably all seen the columbine blooming all over the place right now. And we have a native columbine, so they definitely love that one. And then in the summer, there's so many options for them. So I've just got a few here. So bee balm again, the hummingbirds love the bee balm. It's just bright red, lots of flowers. Kufia is a really fun annual, also called cigar plant, but it gets covered in these orange, long tubular flowers, and the hummingbirds just go nuts for them. Anytime we have them in the greenhouse, you're sure to see a couple hummingbirds in there. And then penstemon. Penstemon is a really fun group of perennials that there's so many different colors and so many types, and they love them. They bloom most of the summer. And salvias, especially the hot lips variety. You guys have probably seen that one, the two-tone red and white. That one is just so beautiful, blooms most of the summer, and it's got to be, top 10 for hummingbirds. And crocosmia is another one that comes on a bit later. That's that kind of big grassy one with the big spikes of bright red, bright orange flowers. And then impatiens. Impatiens are a nice one for shade. It's a little shade annual, but it's got a really nice little. Oh, what was that?
Just ignore that. Somebody didn't have their thing turned off.
Okay. Yeah, impatiens are a really great one for shade, kind of a low growing annual with a really nice little nectar pouch. So I love impatiens. So even in the shade, there's lots and lots we can do for them. And then one of my favorites this year is the monkey flower. That one is a native here. We actually have a red monkey flower right now, but they love that one. It's just covered in blooms in the summer, and you know, stays about maybe 1.5, 2 feet tall, not too big, but they just go nuts for it. Mine's always covered in hummingbirds. So those are a few of my favorite picks for hummingbirds. But again, you know, the key is just always have something blooming for them, and you're sure to keep your pollinators very happy. So then I'll just talk a little bit about selecting your plants when you're ready to start your garden. Just some things to think about, some kind of basic design ideas. So number one, make sure you have a little bit of structure in your yard. And that just means, you know, make sure that it's interesting in the winter, you know, that you've got a few evergreen things, a few woodier things to give you a little bit of interest when there's nothing else going on. So conifers are great for that. Broadleaf evergreen shrubs are great for that. You know, things like that, osmanthus, the ceanothus, sarcococca, those are great little structural additions to the yard. And then having a mix of annuals and perennials. So annuals are the things that are only there for one season. You plant them in the spring, they bloom all summer, and then they die over the winter. And usually those are just covered in flowers, really heavy flower producers, very flashy, but they're only there for a short time. But then perennials are things that are coming back every year. So they're things that you can look forward to. They can be, you know, your little treasure plants that you know will just do their thing every spring for you. And the other thing to think about is having a good amount of height variation. You know, you don't want everything to be 1 foot tall or 2 feet tall. You want some tall things in there, you know, like the tall hollyhocks are fun, along with some little shorties. And it's kind of like the rule for planters. You want a thriller, a filler, and a spiller. And that's totally true for the garden as well. You want something, you know, big and impressive, and you want little filler things all over the place. You don't have too many gaps. And then you want things, you know, spilling over, creeping, nice little ground covers, just lots of variation in height. And it's true for texture as well. You know, you don't want just green leaves everywhere. Think about texture in your yard. You know, get some things that are just interesting for foliage. Things like euphorbia can be, you know, they're not crazy blooms or anything. They have kind of interesting blooms, but the texture is just really cool on something like a euphorbia. And then of course color. You know, think about the colors that you're combining. You can do complementary colors, or you can do, you know, wild crazy colors, cool tones, warm tones. But ultimately, you know, it's your garden. So do what you like. Pick the colors you like. If you like it neat and tidy, go with that. If you like it wild, then go wild with it. Go crazy. So yeah, just, you know, pick what you like. So then once you've picked your plants and you're ready to get in the garden and do some planting, I've just got kind of some basic planting information. So when you actually go to plant a plant, make sure to dig your hole just as deep as the pot that it comes in. Not too much deeper, just as deep. You want it just level with the soil, but dig the hole about twice as wide. And what this does is creates a little water well, so that when you go to water your plants, the water is actually getting in there, getting to your plant. And this will help a lot in the summer, especially if we have another kind of drought summer. And the other thing to do when you're planting is amend your soil. You know, if you have that really hard clay type soil, add a little bit of compost to it, a little bit of woody compost that can kind of help break things up and aerate your soil a bit. And you can do this, you can add a little bit in the hole when you plant. And a good ratio is, 1 part compost or amendment to about 3 parts existing soil. So not too much, just a little bit goes a long way. And make sure too, when you're picking a spot for your plant, to give them enough space to grow. So do a little research, look at the tag, see how big it'll get eventually, because it's really tempting to just cram things together and make it look really good right then. But things grow quickly, even in one season. Things can really explode in a good spot. So make sure that you have enough space, because it'll make it look better in the long run. It'll help with pest prevention. If plants are too crowded, then they're more likely to get sick. So definitely, make sure they have enough space. And when you're done planting, water them in. Super important. Either time it right before the rain comes or water it in really well right after you plant. And then mulch the surface of the soil once you're done. And what mulch is, mulch can be compost, it can be bark, it can be straw, it can be really any kind of organic material on the surface of the soil. But the key is just to cover the soil so that you can keep that water in. And this will help you a lot, again, in the summer, especially if we get another drought. And it can also help you keep nutrients in the soil and just keep your plants a lot healthier and happier. And it looks nice. It looks really nice to do a little mulch on the top and kind of complete the picture. So then once you're done planting, just some basic care information. Everything is going to need water regularly. Even if it's a drought tolerant plant, it's still going to need occasional watering. And some things, will be just fine with the amount of rain that we're getting, kind of depending on weather. But it's so season dependent and weather dependent. So, if we're getting a stretch of hot water or stretch of hot weather where we're not getting any rain for a couple weeks, some things might need water every other day. Some things might need water a couple times a week. So it kind of depends on the type of plant that you have, but they will need water regularly, especially the first year that you plant. Nothing is going to be able to be like a set and forget kind of thing. Always going to need to water. And fertilizing too is just as important, especially for new plantings. And a good rule of thumb is about once a month during the growing season, which is March to August. And I always use organic fertilizers in the ground. Stay in the ground for longer. They don't wash away, and it's just healthier for your soil health and your plants' long-term health to use organic fertilizer. And a good rule of thumb is any fertilizer that's under the numbers 10, 10, 10. Usually on the bag, you'll see those 3 numbers, which represent nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. So just make sure that they're nice and low. And it's okay to use inorganic fertilizers in pots, especially for annuals. That can give you really, really good results if it's just something that's going to live one season. But organic in the ground and inorganic in pots is a good rule of thumb. And then, like I said, keep the soil surface covered. Super important for nutrient retention. You're putting all this fertilizer in and you want to keep it in there. So keep your soil covered and, keep adding organic material to the soil. Especially in the fall, add a ton of mulch to the surface of the soil and it can help kind of loosen things up and give you really nice soil in the spring. So super, super important. But yeah, those are just some basic care instructions for most plants. And that concludes my presentation. So I'm happy to take some questions.
Great. Okay, Hannah, can you open it up for questions or maybe read some of the questions that
Yeah.
we got?
So we just had one question in the chat box, and I think you touched on it a little bit. Is there a difference between catmint and catnip?
Yes. Yes, it's definitely. That's a very common question. So catmint is a really sweet, usually kind of a low growing perennial. Blue flowers, great prolific bloomer, great for pollinators. Some cats like it, some just kind of ignore it. So I think that's kind of where it gets its name. Some cats like it, like they like catnip. And then catnip is kind of more of an herb. Usually it grows pretty tall, and that's the one that cats go absolutely wild for. It kind of looks like a mint, spreads like a mint. So yeah, big difference, definitely.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to unmute themselves, you're welcome to unmute yourself if you have any questions about your specific garden. You're welcome to ask those. Also, just so everyone knows, we will be sending out a recording of this presentation tomorrow via email with a couple of handouts. And it looks like we just had another question come through. What do you recommend as far as successful fruit and nut trees in Bellingham?
Oh, that's a great question. Yeah, there's lots of good fruit and nut trees you can do. The nut tree that we sell here that does really well here is the filbert. Super good grower here. That's the main one we recommend there. But in terms of fruit trees, there's a lot you can do. Most apples do really well here. You can actually grow one particular type of peach. Frost peach does really well here. A lot of people are surprised that you can do peaches here, but you definitely can. Same with plums. Italian plum does great here. And there are a few pears you can do here. Orchis pear is a great one that I've heard people have great success with. Cherry trees. There's definitely a few varieties of cherry trees like Montmorency. It's Lapine. That one does really well. But yeah, it's all about variety, and that's something that we do at the nursery is just select the varieties that do really well in the Pacific Northwest. But yeah, lots you can do.
Okay.
Thanks, Paige. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I have, oh wait, is there
There's
other
just,
ones?
yeah,
down
there's
there?
one more question that just came in.
Okay.
Which pine trees produce pine nuts that grow well at Bellingham?
Ooh, that's a good one. I'm not sure. I'd have to phone a friend on that one. Yeah, I'm not sure about pine nuts. Let me do some research and give me a call later and I'll let you know.
Okay, I have one question, Paige.
Mhm.
At this time of the year, we have lots of people that are getting ready to put their house on the market.
Mhm.
And so they're getting ready to sell it, right? So they don't want to put a whole bunch of money into planting,
Yeah.
but curb appeal is important. Condition is one of the three things to get your house sold. So can you just give us some ideas of maybe some inexpensive ways to put to make their house their curb appeal nicer with some plants? Just any great suggestions would be good.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I would say my main suggestion would be annuals. Annuals are usually inexpensive, very heavy bloomers. Even at this time of year, there's a few annuals that'll do well outside. Um, Things like salvia, like that hot lip salvia, that's a really, really prolific bloomer. It can give a big impact. You can just put it in a pot. Those things don't necessarily have to go in the ground. And something like a salvia, you might have some hummingbirds coming to visit. So that's a really nice kind of flashy pot that you can do. Something else that's blooming like crazy right now is rhodies. Right now we're getting in some really big blooming rhodies that can make a great kind of instant immediate
Color.
gratification. Yeah, like teddy bear. Teddy bear is a really, really beautiful one that's blooming like
Okay.
crazy. And usually they're not too expensive, but it's a nice little flower show. And then a little bit later, hanging baskets. Hanging baskets are fantastic for immediate gratification. Lots of flowers, easy to just hang up on a house.
Perfect.
Awesome.
I am so excited. You know what, Paige? I'm a gardener from way back. I'm on the board, but I'm so busy. A lot of times I don't have time to work in my garden as much as I want to. And your talk right now made me like go, oh, I'm just getting out there and going in my garden, and I'm going to go to the Garden Spot and look up some of these plants that you're talking about too for color. So I'm so inspired, and I'm sure a whole bunch of other people are going to be. Besides, it's really fun to kind of get to know you, right? You're going to be a new icon in Bellingham.
Yeah,
So
I'm
now people
excited
can
for it.
put a name to the face, Paige Lanham.
Yeah.
Let me see one more thing. What was I going to say? Oh, as far as the handouts, Hannah,
Uh-huh.
were we able to attach? I know one thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be able to post this on Facebook. We're going to be able to post this in our newsletter that's coming out, I think today or tomorrow, right, Han?
On Friday.
On Friday, okay.
Mhm.
And so, Paige, did you have some handouts that were going to go, or this?
Yeah,
PowerPoint?
I have those in my email, and they'll be attached to the email with the recording.
Perfect.
So you'll get
Okay.
everything all in one package. And then we did
Okay.
have one last question that just came in.
Okay.
Which currants and berries grow best in Bellingham?
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Do we lose Paige?
Uh-oh, you're a little bit frozen, Paige. Yep, I think she's frozen. Oh,
Okay.
she's back.
Oh,
Can we hear you
hello.
now? There we go. You're back. So yeah, which
Right.
currants and berries grow well in Bellingham?
Yeah, the red flowering currant grows great here because we actually have a native red flowering currant. There's also a lot of edible currants that grow great. There's a white currant that we're getting in the next couple weeks that I'm really excited about. Yeah, currants in general tend to do super well here. And berries too. I mean, you can do all sorts of different raspberries. Raspberries are great around here. Blueberries. There's even some, native blueberries that you can do. But yeah, they do great because some of those are okay with getting a little bit less sun. They don't have to be super, super hot to produce well. Yeah, and I mean, kind of the key with blueberries is just getting a couple different varieties that are going to bloom at the same time, and then you should get really, really nice yields. So super easy to do berries and currants here.
Nice.
Awesome.
Okay. We will call it a wrap. Paige Lanham, I am so grateful for you. We're so glad that Marcy's passed passed it off to you, and so thankful for all your information. Can't wait to get gardening.
Oh, well, thank you, Lori. I so appreciate being able to do this talk with you guys, and thank you so much for having me. And yeah, if anyone wants to come meet me, I'm here on the sales floor most days here at the nursery. So come talk to me. Yeah, love to meet everybody. Oh, and I'll do a little plug here. We are carrying on kind of a Garden Spot tradition here. We're doing our planting day on April 22nd this year. So if you haven't done that before, it's super fun. We do free soil and free design and planting. Bring in pots or buy pots here. And yeah, it's a full day of planting. So you can sign up for time slots or just show up and we'll help you out.
Awesome. Thank you
Thanks
very
so
much.
That's great.
Oh,
Thank you, Paige.
you.
So
Thanks,
appreciate
everybody.
you.